next we have Virginia Torres from Lifespan. And even in normal times, it's common for people working with clients who've when their clients have experienced trauma, that you yourself might bear some of that emotional impact from hearing stories and taking that kind of home with you, thinking about the client afterwards. And so especially now, given that, you know, we have that in our homes, we're not leaving our homes, so there's nowhere really for that energy to even go. Happy to have Virginia to come talk with us about vicarious trauma. She is a staff attorney at Lifespan, and she, in addition to a JD, has a master's in social work. And she wears both hats frequently when she's working with victims of domestic violence. So I will pass the baton to Virginia to talk, to help share practical tips that we can utilize this summer and beyond.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. And I think you should be able to share your screen whenever you want to.
Yeah, so I feel like maybe I should have practiced that because I'm trying to, here we go. That working? Let me see, how do I start this?
Yep.
From beginning.
Perfect.
Okay. Oh, that's not. Here we go. All right. So, hi everybody. How are you doing? I was going to try to make this as most interactive as I could, given Zoom. So I wanted to start off with kind of taking a little survey. I know it's going to be impossible for people to try to talk over each other at once, so I thought we could use the chat feature. And so I just wanted to see if you guys could just think of like one word that describes how you're feeling right now in this whole situation. So throw them out there. But now, how do I? Anxious, tired, overwhelmed, depleted. That's a good one. Exhausted, tired, anxious. So, horrible, Brian. Hopeful, okay. Diana, I like that. Uncertain, bored, exhausted, disconnected. Yeah. So now, tell me one thing that you miss the most. Friends. Friends. Other humans. Friends. Hugs. Meeting strangers. The smell of the air. Oh my gosh, you guys. Coffee shops. Bars. Chatting with people. TJ Maxx. Ignorant bliss. These are great. The subway. Never thought you'd miss that, huh? All right, not wearing a face mask. That's a good one. Not being a germaphobe, seeing family. Okay, and then my last question for you is, some of you kind of already answered this in the beginning, but one thing that you most look forward to when this is over, because I promise you one day it is going to be over. Hugs, travel, getting a drink, hugging everyone, walking outside with fear, meeting new people. These are great. Okay, restaurants. Hopefully those are coming sooner than later. Policy change. So as you can see, I kind of decided to call my presentation Overcoming Vicarious Trauma. So my focus is going to be more how to be on top of it, as opposed to getting into the nitty-gritty of what it actually is. Well, we will obviously talk about what it is. But what we just did right now is kind of a really good tool. So it's called a grounding exercise. And so if you're ever feeling in a situation where you're becoming super overwhelmed, your stress levels are starting to get really high, causing anxiety, then you can do something like this with yourself, and you can also do it with clients. Oh, hopefully my wedding. Congrats. So what we just did there was you take a pause and you kind of identify what you are feeling in that moment. So that's the whole kind of concept of grounding yourself. And then you're just letting yourself be in that situation. So you're talking about what is the most negative impact that you're feeling, and then you're trying to reframe by looking forward at something that can provide you with hope and seeing that the situation is not going to be permanent. So that was just a little quick example of the little tool that you can always keep with you when you're starting to feel like you're in these situations where vicarious trauma may be starting to come over. So like Brett had said, my name actually is Virginia Torres Ryan. I really want to one day, hopefully when I run for judge, get all the votes. So that's why I like to keep that Latino and Irish bit in there. I am an LCSW, so I did my dual degree at Loyola. So I did law school and social work, and then I got licensed. I am a supervisory attorney at Lifespan. I'm not sure if anyone has anybody heard of Lifespan? I know a couple people here are going to be joining us at Lifespan for their fellowships. But Lifespan is a non-for-profit that provides free legal services to victims of domestic violence and sexual assault. And so we do a lot of civil work, civil orders of protection, family law, immigration, and then we also, what I really like about the agency is we have a team of social workers too that do counseling with clients, support groups. So we try to be really holistic. And then I also have my own private practice called Family Horizons. And so I haven't really been doing too much with that right now, but it's my way almost of dealing with vicarious trauma in terms of being able to use both hats and sometimes being able to be in the attorney role and sometimes being in the therapist role, but obviously not with the same client. And then my email is down there too. So if you ever need to reach out, if you ever have a question, if you're ever feeling overwhelmed, anything, don't hesitate to reach out to me. So let's see. I'm incredibly honored to be able to talk about vicarious trauma because it's a topic that I think is super important and relevant to the work that we do. And so like I said before, my goal here is to try to give you some skills to help you tackle vicarious trauma. But in order to do that, then we need to first kind of talk about what it is. So here we go. Okay. So what is trauma? So just so I can have an idea, why don't you guys just throw out, what do you think of when you hear the word trauma? What does that mean to you? There's no wrong answers. Does anyone type it? Okay. Reactions to life-changing events. Yes. Something that seriously impacted your outlook on life, lasting harm, fight or flight, damage internally. I kind of feel, side note, like I'm doing an Instagram live and like reading the comments. It's kind of fun. Okay. Reoccurring pain, hurt, pain, permanent damage. Yep. These are all right on. Okay, so trying to get all this in. What do you think might distinguish a traumatic experience from a stressful one? So basically that question is, obviously there are things in life that are going to make us stressed, and then there's trauma. So what makes it turn from one to the other? What do we think? The ability or inability to work through it successfully. Trauma alters. You guys are experts. You can teach this on your own. The way you carry the experience afterward, lasting impact. Yep. Physiological reaction. Okay, what else did I have here? Okay, so I think everyone on point. It just kind of put some stuff on here. It can be described as a situation where stress caused by an event or series of events overwhelms one's ability to use the tools they normally have at their disposal. So that, I mean, arguably, not even arguably, that's what we're doing right now, being in the midst of a pandemic. So maybe your tools are not available to you, whereas, you know, something that you might do to try to help yourself, whether it's going to a movie, getting your nails done, going to eat, going to the beach, your way of like isolating yourself, or I'm sorry, separating yourself from whatever incident is causing you to be re-triggered. A lot of those options are not available for you anymore. Let's see, I think there's something to do with brain plasticity too, like how your brain processes events that follow. That's exactly right. There is a lot of research and studies on trauma and its impact on the brain, and all the different types of trauma. So it's definitely way more complicated. Body keeps the trauma a different way than stress. Certainly. And then I have here trauma fragments and disorganizes thoughts, feelings, and bodily experiences. So that that kind of speaks to more how it's not just talking about stress, it's then taking it to the next level and how your body is physically changing to the traumatic experience. And then that last part that I had on there, making it extremely difficult to learn from and make meaning out of an experience. So sometimes when you're dealing with your clients and they're coming to you with these really traumatic situations, it can be really impossible to try to find the words or the way to help them overcome it in the moment, whether it's your client meeting or whatever that you're interacting with them based on what the traumatic experience was. It could be something that it can be so devastating to them. One example that can come to mind often can be if it's an unexpected death. It's very hard to find a meaning out of that experience. And that trauma can become something that's incredibly heavy that then is now passed on to you. And we're trying to figure out how we can assist still without getting that trauma onto ourselves as well. And then to just going back to what I said, someone had mentioned to Madison about having to do with the brain. So that's exactly right. There's several different types of trauma. They're definitely interleveled. There's complex trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder, developmental trauma. It depends on what age the incident occurs, what exactly occurred. So it can be very convoluted. And so while those levels of trauma are going to vary, while the levels may vary, it's pretty guaranteed that whatever client you're going to interact with is going to have some kind of trauma that they're carrying. So my next slide says, just so I can kind of get a sense of what everyone is going to be kind of experiencing this summer in their internships. Can everyone just tell me, like, where are you going to be doing your fellowships at, just so I can have an idea of who you might be working with and what issues? Land of Lincoln, let's see, BPI, what's BPI? I don't think I know what that is. Ascent Justice, Lifespan, MALDEF, good for Legal Aid Chicago, all across the board, Center on Wrongful Convictions, Legal Aid Society, Lifespan, Center for Disability and Elder Law. My best friend's the executive director there. You're gonna love Caroline. Center for Conflict Resolution, Chicago Legal Clinic. Okay. Apple Speed. This is great. And so what, you could just put like a yes or a no. Are you going to be working with clients directly? Does anybody know that? Okay. Pretty much looks like everybody. Great. And then are you also going to be working directly with other attorneys or staff who are working with these clients directly? Yeah. So that I feel like can be equally as important, because when we're talking about vicarious trauma, you may be working with someone who has been doing this work for a very long time, and everyone has their own different levels of how they handle vicarious trauma. So I think it's always good to be aware of what the person that you're working with, so with the other staff member that you're talking to, I would encourage you to have a conversation with them about vicarious trauma. What are some things that they do to try to overcome it, and ways that they handle it and deal with it, just so that you can continue to build on your skill set. So what, my next question what populations do you guys expect to be working with in your fellowships? Low-income minorities, disabled, people with disabilities, youth, homeless, Latinx, incarcerated, low income, very, very vulnerable populations. Broccoli, children and families. Okay. Victims of domestic violence, people going through divorce and custody. And then I guess just a question off of that. Are most of your interactions going to be happening remote? Have you guys figured that out yet? Or anybody going to be doing any in-person that you know of? Totally remote, yes, for now, phone and Zoom. Mostly remote as of now. In-person. That's true, I guess we are learning. Courts are changing daily, weekly, it seems like, okay. And then my next question for you guys is, what issues do you expect to be encountered with when working with these populations? And that's very open-ended. Language barriers, sexual assault fear, discrimination, childhood trauma, fear, issues with access, lack of access, yeah, trust issues. I'm worried about connecting with clients who have suffered trauma over Zoom. It feels so impersonal. Very valid. Not only is it impersonal to connect with someone over Zoom, but it's also, especially when it's your first meeting and you don't have the opportunity to build that relationship with them in person and then transfer over to Zoom. That makes it an even harder barrier. And honestly, my best advice to deal with that is to just be completely blunt and honest about it and acknowledging it with the client. You know, this is incredibly difficult. This is not how we would normally have a meeting. But unfortunately, it's the option that we have. And tell me what you need from me to try to help make this as most personal for you. And even if that's maybe showing your client, look, I am in a place where nobody else is at. So this is as confidential as I can make it for you. Something small is I always try to keep it bland behind me, because you never know, something could trigger somebody, even if they're looking at your bed and maybe it's a sexual assault client. So trying to just keep it as neutral as possible, like very little things like that can help with trying to make the meeting as most comfortable as it can be for your client. Okay, so I'm gonna go to the next, oops. Okay, so this is, where am I? Oops, that's not what I wanted to do. Okay, so what does trauma feel like for clients? And I guess I'm just kind of trying to spend a lot of time on this, because ways to overcome the trauma is to really try to understand it, right? So always staying ahead of it. So if you set yourself up with the goal to empathize with your client and put yourselves in their shoes, then you're going to be able to quickly build a rapport with them and get them to trust you. And that's going to help you get the most information out of your meeting, whether that's going to be a Zoom meeting or hopefully one day an in-person meeting. And that will help you with your own prevention of carrying on the trauma to you, because you'll be able to feel like you were able to be as productive as you could be in that session. So I just had this listed out here because these are some things. I've been at Lifespan for about 7 years now, and I've seen, you know, all of these things with clients happen. And it's nice to be aware that these things are going to happen, so that they're not a surprise to you if someone is in your meeting and all of a sudden is throwing up or is saying that they have this headache that's happening or some kind of physical reaction to your meeting or what you're talking about, and you just kind of not knowing how to react to it in the moment. Being able to be ahead of it can really be helpful to keep your meeting focused and to keep it productive and to help you not have to kind of get, I don't want to say wrapped in, but to be separated from the trauma that they're going through in that moment. So let's see, what else I have to say about this. So I think I kind of said this before, but when you are meeting with your clients, it's important to be as mindful as you can of what they're feeling. If someone is meeting with you, I know a lot of people are going to be meeting with victims of domestic violence, sexual assault. If the abuse had just happened, they are going to be in some kind of physical pain or trauma. And so while that might be maybe to the benefit of doing a remote session where you don't have someone who has to physically sit in an office while they may be in physical pain, they could possibly be in a little bit more comfortable situation if they're at home. Then that might be something that comes good out of this whole remote thing, but just things to be aware of when you're meeting with your clients. So these are just a couple more slides about what the trauma is going to look like. And like I had said earlier, if you can kind of identify the trauma, then you can get a better understanding of what that person is going through, and you can develop a plan on how to be able to effectively help them. This can be particularly to the clients that I see. So like that second bullet point I have with self-blame. A lot of times when I'm meeting with a client and maybe we're going over, you know, what your divorce petition is going to look like or what your order of protection petition is going to look like, the conversation can really take a turn and talk about self-blame. And I have a lot of clients that just kind of go on these just tangents about how this is all their fault. You know, they put their children in these unsafe situations, and it can get really dark and it can get there really quickly. And then it can be hard for the person who's, you know, trying to help the client, because now it's almost as if you're changing gears. Your focus was to help them get this petition for dissolution done so that you could get it filed, so that you could help them with their divorce. But now you're spending the majority of your time trying to help them out of this self-blame situation. And so in order to help both people, I think practicing, you know, the activity that we had done earlier, the grounding activity, can help them deal with how they're feeling in that moment and then get redirected to go back to the petition. Because I have seen sometimes where coworkers might say, well, I spent the whole hour just talking about how angry she is with so-and-so. And so that is not really going to be that productive for anybody, because now she'll have to set another appointment because she wasn't able to accomplish her goal the first time. And so one of the things that I love about Lifespan is that we have counselors and we have social workers. So if I'm meeting them for an attorney type appointment, then I'm going to kind of try to do my best focusing on the goals of that session. And then they can have an appointment with their counselor where they can then process more of some of the other symptoms there. And that way it's helping, because I am still going to be able to stay on track with my caseload and my time management, and then the client is also getting served. So if you're at an agency that perhaps doesn't have that holistic approach on staff, there's always the option to refer them to whatever other resource they might need so that you can focus on the issue that they're coming to you with. And that can help you in terms of separating from becoming in a situation where you're picking up a lot of the vicarious trauma. And then just another slide that I had about more examples of what trauma can look like, expressed versus controlled. And you know, if a client is coming to you and they're showing more of the signs from the express, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're more severe or valid than if they were coming from the controlled category. Some other things I want to talk to that I didn't put on this slide that can play in with vicarious trauma are projection and countertransference. So when you're meeting with a client who has came with some trauma that they're experiencing. It can be very common that they can become very angry and frustrated with you directly and treat you in a way that they think will lead to their success. So what I mean by that is, I'm gonna go back to the example of working with victims of domestic violence, just because that's kind of my home. But sometimes, you know, clients who have been in these traumatic situations for a very, very long time under their abusers have kind of seen the way that their abusers act, and to them that's how you accomplish your goals. So now you may have your client starting to become abusive towards you. And so being aware of that, you know, you might be in a session, or maybe you're just getting out of court and court did not go well. Court is not going to go well a lot of the time, unfortunately. And you start to hear things like, you're not fighting for me, like he's winning, you didn't say this, you didn't say that. I think being able to kind of be aware that these comments that they're saying are coming more from the trauma and are not a direct result of how much work and competency you have, it's going to really help you to be able to get in this type of job and not get bogged down with the that can come with it. And then, oops, I'm gonna skip this slide. So because I know I've been talking a lot about overcoming, like finding it. There, I feel like I hear a little baby. Okay, so vicarious trauma, what is it? So I put a definition on there for you guys. Cumulative effect of working with trauma, which can affect many aspects of a person's life. It can be short-term reactions, long-term, after the work is finished. So sometimes you can see when somebody has been doing this type of work for a very long time, it can really start to weigh on somebody. So just so I can kind of get a sense of it, how many of you feel like you're in for the long haul when it comes to doing public interest work? And so everybody sounds like, that's great. Maybe if you're not, you're afraid to say, and that's okay. Why? Why are we in it for the long haul? Liberation. Sure does.
You okay?
So, I'm just going to ask you guys this question. What are you going to do if you feel like you've been doing this job for 1 or 2 years and you don't think you're making the world a better place? I'm trying to find somebody to mute them, and
I think we're good.
okay.
Sorry.
Sorry, Brent. Oh, okay. Let me go back to the chat. Where was that? Oh, Zoom. Okay. Why can't I count? I lost my ability to see the chat. Where'd it go? I see it. Okay. Okay. So I had asked you guys, what are you going to do if you feel like you're not saving the world, which is something that you've made a very long investment to do with your time and your finances. Seeing the long-term generational effects of poverty is something we can continue to seek support on my own, so I continue to work that I care about. Change better. Focus on small victories. That's a great one. Talking to others, working in the same area, and see if I need to change my method. My butterfly wings. Create a hurricane. Can't change the world, change one person's world. That's a great thing. But if you can't change the world, change one person's world, because that will definitely help you in 30 years. Might not be big changes, but other ones. This is great. You guys already have great ideas. So other things related to vicarious trauma, other ways to call it are secondary trauma, compassion fatigue, work-related trauma exposure. If you hear those words, that's essentially the same concept, just other words for it. Focus on something. Okay. So vicarious trauma symptoms, not too different from the trauma symptoms we put on there. So I had mentioned, or maybe I didn't mention this, sometimes it can be really easy to spot a practitioner who has been defeated by vicarious trauma. And that person can usually look a little bit burnt out. And I'll tell you what, if you can sense it, then clients can definitely sense it too. So it's very important, if you can, to try to acknowledge the symptoms and then work on resolving them so that you can be the best version of yourself. Okay. See, so now what I feel like I just did was when you're on that Instagram live feed and someone's like reading a comment and you're like, I don't want to read that out. Anyways, sorry. Okay, so vicarious trauma symptoms, anxiety. I feel like my coworkers, myself, we'd be lying if we didn't say we had some kind of anxiety. I will say back in the day, because I also have my master's in social work, it used to be a requirement that if you were getting a master's in social work, you needed to also see a therapist as well. That's not a requirement anymore. I think it absolutely should be a requirement for both social workers and attorneys, especially attorneys that are doing public interest law, working with clients. So I just want to throw it out there. If there's any stigmas about seeing a therapist, they're ridiculous. It can be a really helpful tool. There's nothing wrong with you if you do, and it can really just help you be a more refreshed version and person for your client, because that's the most important goal. Sleep disturbance, again, is a huge one amongst my coworkers. Maybe like observing the feeling daily is true. Where's it coming from? Going from like feelings are yes, that's a great point, Madison. Self-doubt is huge. Another clinical term that goes around with that is imposter syndrome. And it can be, especially when you're a new attorney and you're starting off and you have a client coming to you, putting their trust with all of their legal needs, and you're supposed to be this ray of confidence that you're going to help them get the resolution and get justice served. But in reality, who knows if you actually can? You might know the law very well, but sometimes judges that you're going to be in front of choose for whatever reason not to. So it can be really hard to be able to give your clients straight answers because there really isn't one, which then results in you doubting yourself all the time. Or maybe you were really confident that you knew this judge really well and you knew this is what he normally does. And for whatever reason, you told your client, you prepped your client that this is going to happen. You go to court that day and you see a different judge sitting there and you're like, what? And now the whole outcome has changed. And when that happens repeatedly, it really causes us as attorneys to self-doubt ourselves. It can arguably be some gaslighting that goes on too, especially if you are doing law where you're working with opposing counsel. So you know, with divorce attorneys, a lot of times abusers will pick lawyers that kind of mirror their own personalities. And so sometimes I have just these opposing counsels who can be really nasty to me. And I try to remind myself they're probably going through their own trauma as well. But that can add to the self-doubt. What else do I have on here? Inability to concentrate, withdrawal, isolation, anger. They're all things that everyone, I feel like, experiences at some point or the other. But then it's a matter of how you're able to deal with these issues when they come up. And I feel like we're all getting good practice right now because we're dealing with a pandemic and we're being forced to find some healthy coping skills and think outside of the box. Just trying to think what else. Appetite changes, minimization, loss of purpose, substance addiction, all things that we can become vulnerable to. Let me just see if there's anything else I wanted to say there. Okay, how can vicarious trauma be avoided or managed? So, I mean, I put some things on here. These are very general ways to do them. If you decide that you're in this for the long haul, then you definitely might need to get some more specific ways to manage your boundaries and specific ways that self-care pertains to you and how you're going to be able to overcome vicarious trauma. And some of the other things that I feel like can be more specific to public interest attorneys and vicarious trauma is that when you've been doing this for a long time, you may sometimes have the tendency to compare yourself to other coworkers. And that can be positive or that can be negative. But I think what is more important in a way to help avoid yourself getting bogged down in any kind of additional negative space is to just always remind yourself that everyone is going through something different. And you're not going to help anyone, including yourself, if you're spending too much energy on what someone else is doing. And so I guess what I mean when I say that is, you know, when you're coming in and you're feeling very mission driven and you are in it to, you know, I read everything that you guys had said with your goals and the change that you want to make. And maybe someone that works at your agency or someone that you know who works in another agency isn't feeling it or isn't as motivated as you are, and maybe you're frustrated, maybe that impacts how your caseload is. I think the best thing that you can do for yourself is to focus on how you can improve what you do, focusing on your own caseload, focusing on how you can make change for your clients. I also think another thing that's really important with vicarious trauma and self-care in the realm of legal aid is to have a good supervisor. So I hope that you all have the opportunity to have good supervision. If you don't and you know you're feeling overwhelmed, feel free. I think I had tagged on a little bit to the one before me where it was talking about networking. Find a mentor who can really help you. I obviously practice in one area of the law, but feel free to reach out to me if you feel like you would like to be connected to somebody who does work in a different type of law. Obviously, Brent knows people too, but that's a big way to help you with knowing your boundaries and enforcing is to talk to someone who's been doing it for a long time and learning how they have their boundaries and how they are dealing with vicarious trauma and self-care so that they can continue to do the work that they've been doing and do it well. Let's see, something else I wanted to talk about on there was countertransference. I don't think I wrote this on the slide, but I did mention a little bit earlier. So does anyone know what countertransference is? Anyone want to take a guess? Clinical term. So, oh, no. Okay. I'll just go ahead and tell you guys. Oh, here we go. Projecting emotions onto the client. Yeah, very close when folks project their trauma on you. Putting your emotions into the client. Yeah, so countertransference, an example that I always like to use is if you have a therapist and she's working with a family, but she may have her own teenage child at home that she can't communicate with and can't, you know, build a great relationship with, and now that can get countertransferred into her her family session where she's trying to help that family unit be able to learn good communication styles. Or if you're trying to help, you know, your clients deal with maybe racial injustices or poverty, or being able to figure out their housing issues, but you as your, you know, lucrative public interest attorney salary may also be having to deal with some kind of housing issues. Just being aware of that countertransference can help you make sure that you're not projecting it back onto the trauma or letting the client's trauma make you more vulnerable to vicarious trauma, because you may be going into something that could arguably, you may be going through something that could arguably be very similar to that situation. Let's see what else. Oops. So I just had one more slide and then I'm just gonna open it up if anyone had some questions, but here's just a couple more tips specific to being public interest attorney, or really any job that I guess you have in the future if you're working with clients directly. Self-care is so important in a world with and without COVID. So just always good to have healthy boundaries with your coworkers at Lifespan. Arguably, we may or may not have healthy boundaries. We are very, very close to each other, which is a blessing because we're very supportive of each other, but sometimes we need to be better about separating ourselves from the actual work that we do. So coworkers can be wonderful because they know exactly what you're going through. They know the struggles that you're dealing with when you're on the job, but when you spend so much time with your coworkers, then you can be in a situation where you're never leaving the job because you're with them all the time, you're talking about clients all the time, and now it might be Friday at 9 p.m. and it's like, we have to turn off, we have to think about something else, or talk about something else that's not related to work. How do you suggest best leaving work at work when work is not leaving? Yeah, it's really hard. I'm struggling with that right now. I am just my own. So I have 2 little kids, and my, I guess, vulnerable spot is when I'm working with clients who don't have their children and their kids are not with them for whatever reason. And for me, it's really hard for me to separate that because I'm at home all the time with my kids, and I just can't imagine that there are people out there that are not. And so what I've been trying to do is going back to that grounding and making sure like I've done everything I possibly can at this point to help that person's situation. As of right now, there's literally nothing else that I can do to help them get reunited with their kids or whatever. So if I continue to spend the rest of the evening thinking about it or worrying about it, that's not going to change the impact. And so just finding a way to shut it off. Another problem too with work at home is that like all my case files are here, and like when I see them, I'm just like, blah. So I try to put them, once I am done for the day, I pack up my home office, I take all the files and I like shove them somewhere where I can't see them for the rest of the day, because if I leave things sitting out my desk, then it's going to make me think about it. So just some little things like that of how you could be making, you know, another problem too, and I'm guilty of this, is even when I would leave the office, I've got my email on my phone and I check it 24/7. Now I'm trying to be better about that, but that could be another way that once this time comes, then I'm not going to check, or maybe I am going to check, but only at this time and this time, and that's it. So it's trying to get clear boundaries of how you're going to limit and separate work from home. Talking about work with others, that one I just wanted to share because I feel like a lot of people outside of the people that you work with, anytime I tell somebody what I do, the first conversation is like, wow, that's so amazing. How you do that work. You're making such a difference. But then no one really ever wants to talk about it too much moving forward because it's pretty depressing. So that goes both ways. So it's nice. So that can be a little bit hard for me because sometimes I feel like, well, my work is just as important as everyone else's work. Not to say that they're not saying it's important, but it's still something that should be talked about, but within boundaries, because you also want to keep things like that last point says is positive. So that was everything that I had structured. I hope this was okay. I can't see people's faces anymore because of the PowerPoint. So I hope that, let me try to change it now. I hope that you got something out of this. How do I see everybody again? And I'm sorry that I'm like Zoom challenged. Let's see. Oh, here we go. I see people again. Does anybody have any questions or comments or something that you wish I would have talked about that I didn't? I know I was a little bit more focused on kind of domestic violence issues, but a lot of the tools can be used for every population that you're going to encounter. And I will tell you this too, unfortunately, with our clients, you know, maybe clients are coming to me because there's a domestic violence issue, but that's not going to be their only trauma. There probably is some poverty going on. There probably is some racial discrimination. There's probably some housing issues. There's probably some criminal injustices happening. So try to keep yourself focused on what you're there to help them with, because you can't help them with everything. And I think the best thing that you can do is you can be very knowledgeable on your specific topic, and then you can have a great set of resources for them and friends in other areas of the law that you can connect them with, so that they're getting some really strong referrals and not just, oh, call this agency. Like, actually get to know somebody from that agency so you can connect them with somebody and know that you're like giving them into good hands with somebody else. You talk about how to stay positive when talking about your work with others when the work is pretty depressing or challenging for others to think about. So I like to always, I love to talk about like client success stories when I'm talking about my work with other people, because then I feel like they can get very motivated about that type of work that I do. You're not always going to have a success story. And then if I'm talking about challenges, then I usually like to throw out things that could be helpful for that. So like if I'm talking to, you know, people who maybe they're all in finance, stuff like that, then I might talk about some of my clients' struggles and little ways. Sometimes everyone wants to help. So having like ideas of how people can help, and it's not always just money, although money is great and can be very helpful. But sometimes it might be like, you know, I'm really struggling with this new change in legislation that's saying judges should default to parents having 50-50 time. And it's really making my job difficult. Like something that would be great is if you could call your legislator and tell them why it shouldn't be this. People, I feel like to hear about that stuff, and if they can do something to help you, that kind of keeps it positive and productive. Any other questions? Oh, you touched on this a little bit. So other self-care strategies. What else are we doing right now? We're not going anywhere. Well, are we going on walks? What are we doing for self-care? Journaling, walks. Are we using, I know a lot of people have been using Zoom for meetings, but one thing that I did that I really enjoyed was doing Zooms with people that I haven't talked to in forever. It's like Zoom happy hours. What's Jackboot TV? I've never heard of that. Oh, Jackbox TV.
You play like games on it. I don't know,
that's
like
fun.
trivia games or stuff like that.
Oh, I feel like anything where you can still be interactive with other people is going to be the best bet, because otherwise we're just isolating. Painting and reading, like that. Doing 30 minutes of creative writing every day. So what does remote contact with, I'm just out of my own curiosity, when you guys are doing your meetings with your clients, have you talked about what those remote meetings are going to look like? Not yet, still figuring it out. Not sure. Okay. So someone asked a very, very good question. How do you strike a productive balance between compassionate listening and also trying to keep a client on track in a conversation? Because you obviously don't want to feel like you're being rude, and you never want to cut somebody off. So one tip that I got from one of my mentors was, anytime I start a client meeting, I always first tell them how much time I've designated for that meeting. Because at least then that way they know, is this going to be a 1 hour meeting or a 2 hour meeting? So I'll usually say, you know, I've allotted an hour to meet with you. And then I kind of have a loose agenda with them. So I can say, you know, the goals of this is to review this petition, or to go over these intake questions. And then we can discuss any questions that you have after I've kind of explained the process. So then that way I feel like it sets the tone of, expectations are a little bit more clear of what are we going to talk about, when are we going to talk about it, and this is how long of a time frame I have. So that way, you know, the client might be like, I can't really talk about something else for 30 minutes if I know I only have an hour to try to get this done. And then once you kind of set the tone, I do feel like it's not, I don't think it's rude. I think you can politely say, if someone starts to talk about something, you know, that's really important, I really want to hear about that, but we're just not that point in the interview yet. So let's focus on this right now, and we'll come back to that. And if we can't come back to that today, then we can set up another time, either if it's by phone, to talk about your other concerns that you have. Another just tip I have too, because I feel like with remote, a lot of times you'll get an email from a client that's just like a full-blown narrative with sporadic thoughts and ideas, and it's kind of like, well, how do I respond to this? What I like to do is I will literally copy and paste their email to me, and I will break it down like sentence by sentence or question by question, and I will answer each thought in like a different color, because I really want the client to know that I read every single thing they said, and I'm acknowledging every single point that they made. Like, I'm not gonna pick and choose what I think needs to be answered in that email. I'm leaving the onus on them to make sure that they know that I've acknowledged everything that they've said. And sometimes that can help them become a little bit more focused, because it's like, oh, okay, well, you answered all of that, so we can move on. I worked in DB last summer and was shocked at how quickly I was struggling. Yeah, so just you know, just some private comments, and I love the private comments, and you guys have my email, keep them coming if you ever want to talk about anything. But I can't tell you again how important it is, if you can, to do some kind of therapy when you're working with clients, because it's a really heavy load that you're going to have, and it's really helpful to be able to talk to somebody. And that doesn't mean that you have to commit to therapy once a week, but even sometimes if it's just here and then. Some agencies also have employee assistance programs, so I would definitely take that up if you could. It's confidential, and it's a way for you to really just hash out with somebody what you're going through, because it gets heavy. It gets hard. It really does. Yeah.
Virginia, with the last couple minutes,
Yeah.
can you talk about if you've had I'm sure you have, but how to react to a client that's having trauma in front of you or having a huge reaction, and maybe in person, and then also what you would do maybe over Zoom if that happened, or a phone call.
Sure. I've had, I would say the majority of my clients having a more overt traumatic reaction has happened in the courthouse. Maybe right when a ruling not in their favor has been issued by the judge, or maybe it wasn't even like that. I don't want to say that big of a deal, but maybe when you start to go to court every now often, sometimes it's a hearing and sometimes it's just a status, and the status is just a check-in with the judge. But sometimes something can come out of that status that can just be so triggering for the client. So I've had times where clients have been screaming in the hallways, and I try to do my best to just you keep yourself calm. I try to get as close to the client as I can to try to keep them grounded, to know that I'm there, and then to try to remove them from the situation. So I'm going to try to find either sometimes there's little private rooms in the courtrooms that we'll go into right away, or if it's a bathroom, or even just a corner, just somewhere where maybe the person, if it's a person who's triggering them, is just out of sight. Trying to just get them out of that situation as far as possible. I haven't had traumatic situation on Zoom yet. I feel like my meetings with Zoom have actually been going probably a little bit better than my in-person meetings in the office. But again, these are clients that I've already had relationships with, not too many where I'm having my first client meeting with them. And I think that's just because they're in their home environment, assuming it's a safe environment. Being on Zoom, you can still get that face-to-face interaction, so it's better than a phone call. And yeah, I haven't had that yet, but I think I would try to do the same things. I think I would try to kind of just do my best to try to get them to take a moment. If it's on Zoom, I probably would let them, I wouldn't have to worry so much about getting them to a quiet space or a space that's a little bit distraction free. But I think when somebody is going through that moment, or when I've had them going through that moment, letting them be able to get all of that out too is really important and really therapeutic for them. So let them say everything they have to say. You know what, I think, and here's an example real quick, because I know we're almost done. I was supervising an attorney, something happened not to their favor in court. We lost an order of protection. The attorney that I was supervising, we lost the order of protection, the client lost it. And we were in the hallway, and the client started screaming at the attorney that I supervised, and just completely taking it out on her, that she wasn't prepared. She was a horrible lawyer. How dare she do this? She ruined her life. She's going to get killed now. It's going to be all her fault. And that attorney just lost it. And so my step one was to immediately separate the two of them. So I took so I guess my main takeaway for that too is, if possible, if you're going to go into a hearing, try to always have someone with you. Try not to ever be alone, because you might need to have, whether it's an advocate or someone else around, so that you're not kind of going through all of that. I would have hated if that attorney was by herself and I wasn't there. So I first talked to the client because she was screaming. I tried to get her to calm down. I actually had her sit down, and then I kind of left her alone for a couple minutes, because I felt like she really needed to calm down, and anyone from my office felt like the last person that she wanted to see at that moment. Then I was more so focusing on the attorney and reassuring her of everything that she had done, all the positive things that the judge had said to her favor, and then that's the best that I could do there at that moment for her. And then going back to the client and kind of just reiterating word for word what the judge had said, and allowing her some time to process that. And then I did schedule a follow-up meeting with that client for that, because I was afraid that it was going to turn into another session where she was going to be yelling at her. But my goal in talking to that client was, I wanted to give her an opportunity to process all of her complaints that she had. I wanted her to feel validated, but I also needed her to be held a little bit accountable to the way that she had treated the attorney, because it's never acceptable to treat anybody that way. And I kind of mentioned that a little bit earlier, that sometimes projection happens. You've got people that maybe they've seen that when people are more abusive and negative to somebody, they can get better results. And that's just not how it works. That's not how it works at our office. And we're here to help, but we're not here to get treated the way that she had treated us. And then everything ended up great and it's fine. But it's important to acknowledge that when it happens. I don't know if I answered the question, but.
No, that was great. Well, thank you, Virginia. 100 people silently clapping to you and appreciating
Love it.
the presentation. So we are now taking a break. We'll be back at 1:30 for a session on conflict management. So hope you all can have a nice 2-hour break to have lunch, catch up on some things, and maybe take some of the tips that Virginia gave and go for a walk, or do some yoga and all that. So thank you all, and see you at 1:30.